Go ahead and get started here. Welcome back. I am excited to be back. I got into the Carbondale train station at about 2 a.m. this morning, and that was not the original plan. We were supposed to be flying into Marion Williamson Regional Airport. It was a long couple of days in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. So, if you have to travel, try and avoid Chicago O'Hare International Airport. My God, what a soup sandwich. All right. Welcome back. So, a week and a half ago, let's kind of pick up the story from where we left off. A week and a half ago, we were talking about just a whole bunch of pretty classical examples of forest and outdoor rec, and some pretty harebrained ideas that folks have had that are sort of outdoor forest rec-ish, or sort of truthy in the lines of forest and outdoor recreation, but that aren't exactly that. And when you kind of take a look behind the curtain, it might be an activity that's pretty damaging to the local environment right there, meaning it's not sustainable. You know, you can't have a million people doing it, for example, and so forth. And then some examples that were just kind of maybe edge cases, like, okay, this, you know, in this particular setting or context, or managed this particular way, like a certain kind of hunting with maybe a new weapon or something like that, that could work out great and be awesome and lots of fun and entirely sustainable, or it could be kind of a mess. So we spent a couple of class sessions up to and into last Tuesday just going through a bunch of examples. So today, our goal is to kind of finish that out with a couple of final examples, and then basically do kind of a self-assessment kind of a quiz, where we'll take a look at some more examples and ask ourselves these same questions and sharpen the pencil a little bit, which is the National Park Service cultural expression for saying, let's kind of fine-tune our understanding and practice on this stuff. So I've got 3 questions up on the board for that. We'll take a look at several different examples, and for each of those examples, we'll kind of answer these 3 questions as a more nuanced way of saying, or a more nuanced way of wrestling with, is this forest and outdoor rec, than just like a simple sort of overly reductionist yes or no. Because a lot of forestry is context specific, right? It's climate specific, it's ecosystem specific. What works great in one area, things that are awesome here in Southern Illinois, horseback riding, for example. Our hunting here for whitetail is pretty all right. Snow geese, stuff like that, and the Great Mississippi Flyway, lots of fun. A terrible idea in some other places, right? So that's question 2 out of 3. Is this sustainable, scaled up to 1 million people doing this kind of a thing? So that'll help us kind of understand at a more functionally university level, what are we managing for? What are we sort of letting in, and what are we kind of holding out when we are forest and outdoor recreation professionals? Okay, so last Tuesday we were talking about adventure and risk-oriented recreation. So, adventure rec is typically longer, typically going into more primitive areas, and we define those as further away from services like roads, visitor centers, flush toilets, and those fancy mosquito foggers, stuff like that. It tends to be a longer trip, tends to be a trip that is more resource dependent, is the term we've talked about, and it tends to be more self-directed. That is, any of you guys ever been to like a national park or maybe an amusement park where the experience is pretty well laid out for you? You know, like you go and you hike the trail that everybody hikes, and that's kind of your day. Zane?
Oh yeah, I did that. Hills. Really sure they both kind of have like main trails.
Yeah, and I bet those main trails are pretty okay, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of helps scratch the itch when you have a very busy and popular national park, understandably, like Glacier, where they're dealing with hundreds of thousands to millions of visitors every single year, all kind of packed into 3, 4, 5 months called the peak season. So it's not even evenly spread out throughout the year. More on that later. So we have this question of, we've got these sort of heavily Park Service set experiences, like they build the trail, they designed every curve in that trail typically to give you a vista or give you a physical challenge or whatever the needs of that experience might dictate. But adventure recreation is kind of at the far end of that, or it can be. For new initiates to forest and outdoor recreation, we're talking about things like Outward Bound, which is a program a little bit like Scouting or Venture Crew, where they take you out for 2-3 weeks, 2-3 months, and it might be a multimodal kind of a thing where you're going kayaking and backpacking and canyoneering. It might be more survivalism oriented, but you're going away from those big popular front country trails that tend to be anchored to big parking lots and visitor centers and crucially search and rescue services and stuff like that. Adventure recreation kind of gets you out a little bit more into it, and we might see descriptors like epic attached to adventure recreation versus I went on a hike this afternoon. Make sense? Okay. So, where we really left off on Tuesday last week was risk-oriented recreation, where kind of the point is to push the envelope on perceived safety and actual safety as expressed in stuff like mortality rates for cave diving, base jumping, stuff like that. Those rates tend to be a little bit different than how people perceive those injury or death rates. So we're going with perceived risk instead of actuarial risk, which is like the statistical basis of risk. And just a lot of forms of forest and outdoor recreation have intensive, risky things going on. Like, this is a very steep, very rocky mountain biking trail, and this video is not loading, but this is somebody taking an endo on their fat tire mountain bike. An endo is when you go end over the front of your handlebars and you land on your face and stop your fall with your teeth. And then they sort of fall off the edge of the trail and sort of go down a very, very greater than 100% slope, essentially cliff face. And it looks pretty touch and go, but then they sort of roll to a stop and rescue starts and stuff like that, right? You gotta risk it for the biscuit and get that sick GoPro edit that would be fire, so you can chase that clout, is sort of the negative, pejorative sense of risk-oriented recreation. Okay. So, we got a bunch of different subtypes of forest and outdoor rec. We've talked about wildland recreation. We've talked about kind of front country versus back country, adventure-based recreation, urban recreation, and so forth. And we also want to think about primitive, meaning non-motorized in this case, versus motorized recreation, because those are pretty different animals. If you've ever been bicycling versus dirt biking or off-road motorcycle riding, they are not the same. So let's talk about that for just a sec. These days with all-electric trucks like Rivian and stuff like that, Tesla truck, F-150 Lightning, stuff like that, where you have absolutely inhuman amounts of torque at low speed. Somebody off the shelf can buy a high-clearance electric truck and go, it's called wall crawling, where you basically drive up a near cliff. And if you're doing it right, doing it nice and slow, you get up the cliff and up over the lip and continue on to the next problem. But if you don't, then the truck is cartwheeling down the cliff face, and it's all very exciting. But that's only a thing that's even possible in the last let's say 40 to 50 years, right? First with internal combustion engines, of course, but those Jeeps, those Humvees since the 1990s, required some very, very specific engineering, some very specific hardware, some very specific material science. Stuff like, we're starting to see carbon fiber and more titanium alloys, magnesium alloys used in stuff like outdoor forest rec motorsports, stuff like that. And that stuff just didn't exist before, 70s, 80s, 90s, when people started taking the 70s version of the Sawzall, their Ford Bronco, when that was like the only SUV that existed, and sawing off the roof, because that was cool. You could drive around in the hot, muggy Southern Illinois summers and just like drive all over the forest, for example. And that was a very popular thing back in the day. These days, the Forest Service, they don't want you to drive your Bronco or your Rivian truck or your whatever all over the forest, even though it would still be really fun, because motorized recreation can get multiple tons of truck. Electric trucks are very, very heavy, right? The electric Hummer has, 6,000 pounds of battery, something like that? It's insane. 3 tons of just battery, and then you got the whole rest of the vehicle wrapped around that. So whatever the actual number is, it's a lot. And that just creates a different set of pressures or impacts and stuff like that on the forest recreation environment, the ecosystems and so forth, and also on the built environment, right? Where you have river crossings, stream crossings and stuff like that. It's really, really fun to gun it, full send it across a river in your truck just to see if you make it across. And if you don't, that's funny and sad, and you whip out your cell phone and call a friend with their Jeep and their winch, they're come along, and they drag you out. Hopefully your engine's not flooded and ruined and stuff like that. But all of the impacts that happened while that truck was there, in the middle of a riverine system, right? Those impacts remain after the person has had their fun. The carbon dioxide we spend into the air to do motorized recreation, most of it right now, is going to be around for between 85 and 115 years, depending on where it ends up going and how it gets pulled out of the atmosphere. So for a fun afternoon, we're paying the bill on that for the next, let's say, about 85 years, optimistically. Okay? So, sometimes it's amazing and worth it, and we can handle it. We can manage the emissions or shift to lower emission or zero emission technologies to get it done. And sometimes we're not doing that right now. So we are paying a price tag for that. So primitive versus motorized is a non-trivial distinction. This is a big deal. Again, it's a big deal when you're multiplying it by 1 million people. When in some other countries, which have triple the population of the United States, China now has, oh my God, almost 4 times the population of the United States. So for every man, woman, and child here in the U.S., there are 3.8 to 4 Chinese folks, wanting to do the same kind of stuff, right? Rock climbing is fun, hunting is fun, going to national parks and checking out cave systems is fun, and so forth. So when we're talking about 1 million here and 1 million there, when you think about our contributions or impacts or harms to our ecosystems as a function of forest and outdoor rec, those millions start adding up pretty fast. The peak visitation at our most popular national parks here in the U.S. is just over 6 million people per year. Bigger ones, outies, within easy driving range of New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, the whole eastern seacoast, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, places like that. About 6 million visitors a year. China opens a national park, and they have 24 million visitors a year, just day one. So, this is a lot. And we gotta ask ourselves these questions. Does this example that I'm looking at, as far as forest and outdoor recreation, as an activity that maybe millions of people, maybe tens of millions of people want to do each year. Is that exceptional, or is it just kind of a low value, time waster kind of a thing to do because we're bored and we got nothing better to do, right? If that's the case, well then as park rangers we can probably work with folks to bring something that is unique, exceptional, right? There's a difference between walking around on the Shawnee and encountering amazing and unique things on the Shawnee. The Panther Den Wilderness, there's a ton of archaeology sites. Did you know that? Like rock shelters. I mean, Native Americans lived all throughout here. First Nations folks, some of them still do, right? Well, their descendants still do. That's exciting. That's amazing. Like, if you've ever found a potsherd or an arrowhead or something like that, walking around in the Shawnee, that's really exciting. And that's a unique opportunity because there is no substitute for that arrowhead or that spear point, you know? Bless you. Each one is literally unique. So, we have a bunch of subtypes of forest and outdoor recreation. We spent a couple of class sessions going through a bazillion different examples. Go ahead and pull out a sheet of paper. And go through some examples in a sort of low-key quiz format. Now, for those of you with test anxiety, I feel ya. So, as we go, you can change your answers if you see fit to change your answers. Okay? The point here isn't to hold your feet to the fire in an in-class test exercise. It is to learn. So, go ahead and grab a sheet of paper. And a writing instrument. Put your name at the top. Title of this quiz, Is This Forest Rec? ? And I know that glare is kind of a problem on these green boards. Can everybody see these 3 criteria real well? If you can't, feel free to move around the classroom to where you can see them. That's not a problem. If we need to turn on the front overhead lights for a little bit better visibility, let me know. Yeah?
What's the second line of number 3?
What is the second what?
The second line of number 3. Does it reflect a what?
The second line, I'll just read through all of them. Number 1, does, this example that's going to go up on the screen, does it meet the definition of forest rec? Right? Like it's not just leisure, it's definitely not sports, it's not anything else that's forest rec adjacent. It is forest rec specifically. All right. Number 2, is this sustainable times 1 million? And really, if we're being technically correct, if that's kind of correct, we'd say 1 million people per year. We always want to express this as a rate. It's not just a one-off 1 million people and then we all go away. All right, it's a steady state rate. Does this, number 3, reflect an exceptional and or unique opportunity? So, not every trail is an exceptional or unique opportunity, but some of them are. Like doing the keyhole route on Longs Peak at Rocky Mountain National Park, there is no substitute for shooting the keyhole at Longs Peak. It's amazing, okay? There is no substitute for scrambling around and backpacking in 3 dimensions at Canyonlands, through caves, up and down canyon walls, through dry arroyo washes and boulder fields. It's amazing, and there is nothing exactly like it anywhere else on the face of the planet. But none of these questions are perfect in-out sorters except for the first one, all right? Because again, remember, something that is sustainable here in Southern Illinois may be absolutely impossible to keep running up in Alaska, or in the deserts of Arizona, or at a marine protected area out in the Pacific, okay? And it's not automatically wrong or exclusionary if a trail or rock climbing or tree climbing or wall climbing or whatever if it's not unique, it can still be forest and outdoor recreation. It just gets viewed and used a little bit differently, right? We treat our dog walking trails a little bit differently. We experience our dog walking trails a little bit differently than a trail at Glacier National Park. So, 3 questions for each of these. I'll walk you through and we'll do our thing. If you have any questions at any time, let me know. This is a pretty informal quiz. All right, first example. Is this forest rec? And oh no, it's not a video. So let me explain what's going on here. She's gonna do some like gymnastic thing where she kicks her legs out sideways and starts doing like yoga poses like off the side of this tree, and then the branch breaks and she just falls to the ground and the branch hits her in the head. Is this forest recreation? And to answer that, for number 1, write lady falling out of tree, or however you describe it, and answer these 3 questions. Each of these 3 questions, I've formatted it as a yes or no question. But if you're not sure of the clear yes or no for this, somebody doing basically aerial yoga in a tree, and then the tree branch breaks and whacks her in the face as she hits the ground. If you're not sure, you can explain your reasoning beyond a yes or no. Okay. Because again here, the point isn't to hold your feet to the fire, it is to wrestle with this stuff. It's to critically think about, okay, so if I'm climbing a tree and the tree branch happens to break and I capture it on video, is this forest and outdoor recreation? Is this something we want to be managing for or providing as park rangers? Okay. So, for this one, yes or no, does it meet the definition of forest and outdoor recreation? Is it not sport? Is it not a passive pastime, time waster? Is this sustainable times 1 million? If we have 1 million people a year doing this activity, let's say on the Shawnee, this is not at the Shawnee of course, but if we had 1 million people a year doing this on the Shawnee, is that sustainable? Can we keep this up and running? And 3, is this a unique or exceptional opportunity or not? If you want to explain your thinking on any of these 3 questions for this particular example, take your time. Doesn't need to be an essay or anything. You're not going to impress me with lots and lots of words, just good quality thinking. So a sentence or 2 will be just fine. Move on to the next one. Hopefully these videos are playing. If not, let me take a minute and figure out what's going on here. So, with all of these, we're asking these same 3 questions. Does it meet the definition of forest recreation, number 1? Number 2, is this sustainable? The activity in each one of these videos, is this sustainable when multiplied out across let's say just arbitrarily 1 million visitors per year in this particular setting or environment. And number 3, does the activity in combination with the setting, in combination with the person doing it, is this an exceptional or unique opportunity or not? Or is this the kind of thing where it's pretty bog standard and we could do this lots of different places for pretty much the same outcome, the same effect in terms of the experience that you get out of it?